Miyamoto Musashi, The Way of the Lone Sword, The Thirsty Ronin, The Roads of Hunger. 3 months had passed since the snows of Sekigahara had drunk the blood of 60,000 men. The winter of 1600 was particularly cruel, not only because of the bone-piercing cold, but also because of the famine that spread through the provinces like a silent plague. The Great Battle had decided Japan's political fate, but its aftermath still bled through the dusty roads where thousands of masterless Ronin roamed, proud samurai reduced to armed beggars. Among these ghosts of war walked Miyamoto Musashi, now 18, with a reputation that grew like shadows in the twilight. His name was whispered in roadside taverns, in tea-houses frequented by warriors, in monasteries where warrior monks still practiced forbidden martial arts. They said he was invincible. They said his swords drank souls instead of blood. They said he was not entirely human. Musashi didn't care what they said. He cared only about what he hadn't yet tested, about the limits he hadn't yet reached, about the perfection that still danced, always one step ahead of his blade. Each dawn found him on some different path. Each dusk found him practicing alone under the stars, refining movements that were already deadly precise until they transcended mere technique and became pure expressions of will transformed into steel. The road he was following on this particular day wound through the mountains of Iga, homeland of Japan's most feared ninja, where every shadow could hide a blade and every silence could precede death. It was a place where sensible men avoided traveling alone, especially Ronin without clan or daimyo protection. But Musashi was no sensible man. He was something more dangerous than the land itself. Hunger gnawed at his insides like a wild animal, but he had learned to transform even physical pain into fuel for his lethal focus. Every pang of emptiness in his stomach reminded him why he needed to keep fighting, keep winning, keep proving to himself that he had transcended the ordinary limitations of mortal flesh. The master of the lost school. It was at a crossroads marked by a faded red torii that Musashi encountered his next test. Sitting in the shadow of the sacred gate was a middle-aged man, thin as a dry twig, his weather-beaten face etched with scars that mapped decades of combat. His clothes, though worn, still bore the emblems of a swordsmanship school Musashi vaguely recognized, one of many that had flourished during the wars and died with the Tokugawa peace. "Miyamoto Musashi," the man said, not looking up from the dirt floor where he was drawing characters with a twig. "The demon of Sekigahara, the young man who kills without breathing heavily." Musashi stopped, his right hand instinctively finding the hilt of his katana. "You know me, but I don't know you." "My name is Seijuro Yoshioka," the man said, finally raising his eyes, which shone with a light Musashi recognized immediately. The hunger for perfection, the same fire that burned in his own pupils. Or rather, it was Seijuro Yoshioka. "Now I'm just a ghost searching for redemption." The name struck Musashi like a thunderbolt. The Yoshioka school was legendary, one of Japan's oldest and most respected swordsmanship traditions. Its masters had served the shoguns for generations, taught princes and generals, and forged techniques that were guarded like secret treasures. To see one of their representatives reduced to a ragged Ronin was like witnessing the fall of the gods themselves. "What happened to your school?" Musashi asked, genuinely curious. Seijuro laughed, but it was a joyless sound, like dry leaves being crushed by the wind. "The same thing that happens to all traditions in the Tokugawa era. Peace. The damned peace that kills warriors more efficiently than any war." He stood slowly, revealing a sword whose hilt was so worn from use that the leather had molded itself permanently to the shape of his fingers. "My family taught swordsmanship for 200 years. We were masters of shoguns, trainers of heroes, keepers of secrets who could cut mountains, and now we are nothing. Because in a world at peace, who needs lethal mastery?" Musashi felt something strange in his chest, not pity, for that emotion had long since died in him, but a kind of recognition. He saw in Seijuro a possible future for himself, a master without purpose, a perfect weapon in a world that no longer needed weapons. "Then why are you here?" he asked. "Because I heard about you, about the young man who fights not for money or loyalty, but for the pure joy of perfection. And I thought, perhaps there is one last lesson I can teach. One last time my school can serve the purpose for which it was created. Seijuro drew his sword with a movement so fluid it seemed the blade had simply materialized in his hand. Do you accept the challenge, demon of Sekigahara? Will you let an old ghost die doing what he was born to do? Ghost dance. The duel that followed was unlike any Musashi had fought before. There were no screaming spectators, no bets being placed, no prize beyond the satisfaction of a life well lived meeting its fitting end. It was pure. Two sword philosophies in deadly dialogue, two eras of Japanese history measuring each other through steel. Seijuro fought as if he carried the weight of 200 years of tradition in every movement. His techniques were ancient, refined through generations, honed to absolute perfection. Each cut was a quote from masters centuries dead, each parry a verse from an epic poem written with blood and sweat. Musashi, in contrast, fought as if he were inventing fencing every moment. There was no tradition in his movements, no respect for established forms. It was pure lethal improvisation, instinct transformed into technique, a hunger for victory distilled into movements that defied everything the ancient masters had taught was possible. The clash of these two styles created a symphony of steel that echoed through the mountains like the music of the gods. Each exchange of blows was a philosophical dialogue conducted at lethal speeds, each dodge a question answered with potential death. Seijuro was good, better than any opponent Musashi had faced so far. His experience made up for his age advantage, his perfect technique balancing the young man's brute strength. At times, Musashi found himself genuinely pressured, forced to admit that there were levels of mastery he had not yet considered. But then something changed. Seijuro, overcome with the excitement of finally having a worthy opponent, made a nearly imperceptible mistake. A half-second hesitation between two movements, a break in the fluidity that had characterized his fight. It was the kind of mistake only someone with superhuman reflexes could spot and exploit. Musashi didn't just notice. He moved like lightning drawn to the exposed metal. His two swords moved simultaneously, one blocking Seijuro's blade, the other finding the exposed space in his defense. The duel ended in silence. Seijuro stood for a moment, staring down at where Musashi's short sword had met his heart. There was no pain on his face, only a deep, serene satisfaction. "Thank you," he whispered, falling to his knees. "Thank you for letting me die a swordsman." As the life drained from his eyes, Seijuro smiled. He had found in Musashi not only a worthy opponent, but proof that the art of the sword had not died with the age of war. It had evolved, transformed, and found new expression in the hands of a generation that knew no bounds. The heritage of blood. Musashi remained beside Seijuro's body long after the old master's last breath left his lips. There was something different about this death. It wasn't just another victory in his growing collection of triumphs. It was a transmission, a passing on of knowledge that transcended mere physical technique. In the final techniques Seijuro demonstrated before his death, Musashi glimpsed centuries of refined wisdom. He saw movements he had intuited but never fully expressed, principles of timing and distance that had remained nebulous in his mind until demonstrated by the veteran's mastery. More importantly, he saw in Seijuro a mirror of his own possible future. The old master had dedicated his entire life to the perfection of the sword, only to discover that the world no longer held such perfection. He had become a ghost of a bygone era, wandering the streets in search of a purpose that peace itself had stolen from him. "I will not be like you," Musashi whispered to the silent body. "I will not allow the world to make me irrelevant. If peace has no place for swordmasters, then I will create my own." He took Seijuro's sword, a blade forged by master craftsmen, tempered by generations of use in actual combat. He wouldn't take it with him. His own weapons were extensions of his soul, impossible to replace. But he studied every detail of its construction, absorbing lessons in metallurgy and balance that no formal school could teach. Then, with the reverence due a fallen warrior, he thrust his sword into the ground beside Seijuro's body. creating a makeshift memorial to a man whose only tombstone would be the memory of those who had witnessed his last lethal dance. The sun was setting when Musashi finally walked away from the crossroads. The growing shadows of the mountains seemed to swallow the place where the last representative of the Yoshioka school lay in eternal rest. But in his heart, Musashi carried something new. Not just the techniques he had observed, but a deeper understanding of his own destiny. It wasn't enough to be invincible. He needed to be eternal. He needed to create something that would survive the changes of the world, that would remain relevant even when the samurai era became just a memory. He needed to become more than a warrior. He needed to become a legend that transcended time and circumstance. The hunger in his stomach had been temporarily forgotten, replaced by a much greater hunger, the hunger for immortality through absolute perfection. The hunter becomes the hunted. The weeks that followed brought a change in Musashi's routine. Instead of actively seeking out opponents, he found they were coming to him. News of his victory over Seijuro Yoshioka had spread through the invisible communication networks that connected Japan's wandering warriors, and now carried a reputation that acted like a deadly magnet. Young Ronin, eager for glory, challenged him in taverns. Bitter veterans sought in him the opportunity to prove that experience still trumped raw talent. Masters from lesser schools came to test their secret techniques against the young man who had defeated a member of the fencing aristocracy. Each duel only fueled the growing legend. Musashi didn't just win, he won with an ease that bordered on the supernatural. His techniques evolved with each fight, absorbing and refining elements of the styles he faced, transforming each victory into a lesson that made him even more lethal. It was on a spring morning, when the cherry blossoms bloomed like bursts of pink snow, that he faced his most unlikely opponent yet. It was not a samurai or Ronin, but a warrior monk from the Hozoji temple, a giant of a man whose shaved head gleamed like polished bronze in the morning sun. "I am Honiden Matashichiro," the monk said, his voice deep as the roar of a temple drum. "Disciple of the Todaryu school, servant of Buddha and protector of the innocent, I come to challenge you not for personal glory, but because your bloodlust offends the heavens." Musashi studied the immense man before him. Honiden was easily twice his size, with arms like tree trunks and hands that could crush stone. He wielded not a sword, but an iron staff, a brutal weapon that could rend bone as easily as it could break twigs. "Do you think I'm bad?" Musashi asked, genuinely curious. "I think you're empty," Honiden replied, assuming a fighting stance that made his muscles tense like bowstrings. "You fight not for justice, not for the protection of the weak, not even for personal honor. You fight only to feed something dark inside you. That's not the way of a warrior, it's the way of a demon." The monk's words touched something deep within Musashi, something he had tried not to examine too closely. There was truth in them. He truly fought only to feed his own need for supremacy. He protected no one, served no cause greater than himself. But instead of disturbing him, this realization liberated him. "Maybe you're right," he said, drawing his two swords. "Maybe I am a demon. Let's see if Buddha can exorcise demons." Iron against steel. The fight between Musashi and Honiden was completely unlike anything he had experienced before. It was not a duel of technical finesse or reflex speed, but a clash between fundamentally opposing philosophies, the obsessive pursuit of individual perfection versus the serene dedication to the greater good. Honiden fought like a mountain come to life. Every blow of his iron staff carried enough force to shatter armor, every movement calculated to maximize damage while minimizing exposure. There was a brutal economy to his style, no flourishes, no waste, just the efficient application of devastating force. Musashi, accustomed to overcoming opponents through speed and superior technique, found himself forced to completely rethink his approach. The monk's staff was too long for him to simply run around the outside, too heavy to block directly, and wielded so expertly that there were no obvious openings to exploit. For the first time in months, Musashi felt something he had almost forgotten, the real possibility of defeat. The monk pressed his attack with the relentlessness of a storm, each blow forcing Musashi back, each movement testing the limits of his agility. The iron staff whistled through the air like a metallic serpent, creating gusts of wind that were dangerous in themselves. "See how it feels," Honoden shouted, his staff passing so close to Musashi's head that it cut off a few strands of hair. "See what it's like to be the hunted instead of the hunter. This is what your opponents feel, this fear, this desperation." But the monk had made a fundamental mistake. He had assumed that Musashi would react to fear the same way other men did. Instead of despair, the young Ronin felt something completely different, a wild, pure joy he had not experienced since Sekigahara. He had finally found someone who could actually kill him. The realization of this possibility didn't paralyze him, it liberated him. Musashi stopped trying to fight as he always had and began to improvise completely, creating techniques as he executed them. He used his longsword for impossible defenses, his short sword for attacks from angles that defied geometry, and his own body as a third weapon. The turning point came when Musashi simply stopped retreating. Instead of avoiding the next devastating blow from the staff, he ran straight toward it, accepting an impact that broke two of his ribs in exchange for the opportunity to get inside the monk's guard. Once inside, the iron staff became more of an obstacle than a weapon, and Musashi, bleeding but exultant, discovered that even a servant of Buddha could die when cut in the right places. The price of transcendence. Honoden died as he had lived, with serenity and dignity. Even with Musashi's blade in his heart, his last moments were spent not in curses or supplications, but in silent prayer for the sins of his killer. "May Buddha have mercy on your soul," he whispered, falling to his knees as blood ran from his mouth. "Because you certainly won't have mercy on your own." Musashi remained standing over the monk's body, his broken ribs sending waves of pain through his torso with each breath. But the physical pain was insignificant compared to what he felt in his soul, a toxic mix of triumph and emptiness that grew with each victory. Honoden had been a good man. That was undeniable. He had dedicated his life to protecting others, to serving a cause greater than himself, to channeling his strength for noble purposes. And Musashi had killed him simply because he could, because the opportunity had presented itself, because feeding his own need for supremacy was more important than preserving a force for good in the world. "What have I become?" he murmured to the cherry blossoms, whose petals were now stained with the dead monk's blood. But even as he asked the question, he knew he couldn't stop. He couldn't turn back. The path he had chosen had only one direction, forward, through more duels, more deaths, more proof of a supremacy that never seemed definitively established. He had transcended ordinary human limitations, but the price of that transcendence was his own humanity. With each victory, he felt a part of himself die. Not the part that could wield a sword, but the part that could care about something beyond the next fight. The cherry blossom petals continued to fall around him as he walked away from the spot, each one resembling a tear he was no longer able to shed. The endless path. The road stretched before Musashi like a sleeping serpent, winding through landscapes that changed with the seasons, but remained fundamentally the same. Places where men were born, lived, and died without ever touching the transcendence he had achieved through steel. His ribs healed over the next few weeks, but something deeper remained broken. Honoden's death had been a milestone, not just another victory, but a line crossed irreversibly. He had killed not just an opponent, but a genuinely virtuous man, and he had discovered that it didn't bother him as much as it should have. This self-discovery was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it freed him from the last vestiges of moral doubt that could have interfered with his pursuit of perfection. Terrifying because it revealed how far removed he had become from anything that could be called normal humanity. But Musashi wasn't seeking normalcy. He sought something far more rare and precious, immortality through absolute mastery. And if the price of that immortality was his soul, then so be it. Souls were ephemeral. Legends lasted forever. Fame continued to spread before him like ripples in a pond. In each new province he crossed, new challenges awaited him. Some sought glory, others revenge. many simply the opportunity to test their skills against the man who had become the standard by which all swordsmen were measured. And Musashi received them all with the same lethal courtesy, the courtesy of a clean and final death. The feral orphan of Mimasaka was now completely gone. In his place walked something new and terrible, no longer a man searching for identity, but a force of nature that had found its perfect form. The thirsty Ronin had drunk deeply from the wellspring of supremacy and had discovered that it never completely quenched his thirst. There would always be another road, another challenger, another test of the limits of what was humanly possible, and Musashi would walk them all, carrying his growing collection of victories like an invisible cloak of dark glory. The journey to invincibility was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun.